Between 1947 and 1952, American skies filled with reports of flying saucers. For the United States Air Force, this influx presented an immediate crisis of communication overload rather than a military invasion. The nation was entering the deep freeze of the Cold War. Military personnel operated on high alert, monitoring the horizon for advanced Soviet aircraft incursions. Incoming civilian UFO reports complicated this mission. These accounts were qualitative, emotional, and highly subjective, making them nearly impossible to verify. This subjectivity stood in direct opposition to the rigid military requirement for hard, actionable, and objective intelligence. The volume of reports created a specific national security threat. Genuine Soviet incursions could slip through warning systems because the channels were clogged with thousands of civilian sightings. The primary danger of the UFO phenomenon was the sheer volume of unstructured noise, paralyzing the nation's early warning data channels. Realizing they needed a scientific approach to manage this data, the Air Force commissioned the Battelle Memorial Institute. This partnership produced Project Blue Book Special Report No. 14. The core mandate was to take 3,201 subjective eyewitness accounts and convert them into the mechanized quantitative format described here in the subtitle. Analysts faced a translation problem: how to apply the scientific method to a phenomenon defined by its unidentifiability. They had to strip away human emotion, narrative, and bias from the reports to find mathematically sound patterns. To resolve the intelligence crisis, the Air Force had to invent a data architecture capable of quantifying the unknown. The first step of the pipeline replaced unstructured letters with standardized multi-page questionnaires. Analysts extracted discrete variables from these narratives: color, number of objects, duration of observation, brightness, shape, and speed. To handle this, they mechanized the data using standard IBM punched card systems. Assigning each variable a specific punch code turned qualitative memory into machine-readable data. This transcription required massive scale, resulting in 3,201 individual cards for the total sample of sightings. As noted here, reducing the data to a form suitable for mechanical manipulation was the mandatory prerequisite for any advanced statistical analysis. The IBM punch card pipeline transformed psychological experiences into sortable, computable datasets. The team established broad categorization buckets: astronomical, aircraft, balloons, and other. They set a relatively low threshold for a report to be labeled a known object. If only two analysts independently agreed on a prosaic explanation, the case was closed. In contrast, the team applied a highly conservative definition for any sighting labeled an unknown. Under the four-analyst rule, a panel of 4 scientists had to reach a unanimous consensus that a case fit no known parameters before granting it unknown status. This stringency isolated only the most inexplicable cases for final statistical testing. This high barrier ensured that any patterns discovered later would be scientifically valid rather than artifacts of sloppy sorting. The scientists then applied chi-square testing to the sorted data. A chi-square test is a mathematical method used to determine if two datasets are significantly different or if their variations are merely random chance. This index lists the specific variables the scientists tested. They tested the physical appearance of knowns against unknowns to compare their reported shapes. They also ran kinematic comparisons, testing the speed variables of the two groups. The experiment assumed that if unknowns were extraterrestrial or advanced Soviet craft, their statistical distribution of speed, shape, and color would differ from weather balloons or meteors. A divergence would have provided mathematical proof of a novel technology operating in U.S. airspace. The null hypothesis for this test assumed that no significant difference existed between the two sets of data. Chi-square testing reduced the question of extraterrestrial visitation to a purely mathematical comparison of variable distributions. The chi-square tests produced a null result. The distributions of the variables were essentially identical, and the null hypothesis held firm. The initial 1952 study broke down into 69% known, 9% insufficient information, and 22% unknown. This result meant the unknowns were not a distinct class of phenomena, but rather cases with insufficient or poor data. Follow-up data from 1953 to 1954, captured after reporting standards were tightened, confirmed this trend. When the Air Force demanded better data, the unknown category dropped to 9%. In 1955, the Air Force introduced the 4602 Air Intelligence Service Squadron to investigate sightings on the spot. With rapid field response, the percentage of unknowns fell to just 3%. The data proved a direct correlation. As scientific rigor increased, the true unknowns simply evaporated. Special Report 14 concluded there was a complete lack of valid evidence of physical matter. Working with the Robertson panel, this document triggered a shift in U.S. Cold War intelligence policy, moving resources away from field investigation. The Air Force realized the sightings themselves were the liability, independent of a physical threat in the sky. Panicked civilians constantly clogging vital intelligence communication channels with UFO sightings posed a severe, unacceptable vulnerability to national security. This prompted a pivot toward an active public debunking campaign. The Air Force used debunkery as a tool to clear civilian noise from the radar, protecting the integrity of the nation's early warning channels. Project Blue Book functioned as a successful data management and psychological operation, securing the reporting grid by managing public perception. Special Report 14 used statistical analysis to close the book on the flying saucer threat, proving that the most dangerous aspect of the phenomenon was the data bottleneck it created.